The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. I remember because I'd just set it down on the nightstand, that small ritual of settling in, pulling the covers up, letting the day finally release me. The screen lit up with his name, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. His voice came through fractured, the words tumbling over each other like he couldn't quite hold them in anymore. He left. I don't know where to go. There was a sound underneath his words, the sound of someone trying very hard not to fall apart completely. I didn't hesitate. Come here. Come to my place. The decision was immediate, instinctive. I got out of bed and started moving through the apartment, turning on lights, straightening things that didn't need straightening. The question that crystallized in that moment was simple but impossible. What happens when you let someone vulnerable into your space? Not just into your home, but into the quiet places where you're alone with yourself. I got out of bed and started moving through the apartment, turning on lights, straightening things that didn't need straightening. The dual promise hung there unspoken. I could offer him comfort, real comfort, a safe place to land. But I already knew, standing there in my living room at midnight, that boundaries were about to blur in ways neither of us had anticipated. The waiting felt longer than the 40 minutes it actually took. I kept repositioning myself, on the couch, then at the window, then back to the kitchen, making tea I wasn't sure he'd want. The apartment felt different under this new weight of expectation. The light from the hallway looked sharper somehow, casting longer shadows across the walls. I could hear the city outside, that distant hum of late-night traffic, and underneath it, my own breathing, deliberately steady. When his car pulled up, I heard the engine cut off, heard the door open and close. The walk from the parking lot to my building felt eternal, and then the knock. Softer than I expected, almost apologetic. Opening the door was harder than hearing his voice had been. In person, he was smaller, his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to take up less space, like his grief had compressed him somehow. His eyes were red, swollen from hours of crying, and there was a fragility to him I'd never quite seen before. He looked like someone who'd been shattered and was holding himself together through sheer will alone. The hug at the threshold lasted longer than usual. Neither of us pulled away first. I felt him breathe into my shoulder, felt the tremor in his body, and something protective unfurled in my chest. When we finally stepped apart, I guided him inside without speaking much. Words felt too small for what was happening. I made tea, chamomile, something gentle, found extra pillows from the hall closet, adjusted the thermostat even though the temperature was fine, just needing something to do with my hands. He sat on the edge of my bed, not the floor where he'd asked to sleep, and I didn't correct him. Couldn't. The conversation drifted between his pain and safer topics, work, mutual friends, anything but the real question hovering between us. Hours passed like that, the night deepening around us. Exhaustion settled into his features, softening the sharp edges of his panic. I became hyper-aware of his presence in my space, the way he occupied the room, the specific gravity of him sitting there. Every small moment of care felt charged with something I couldn't name. Finding him an extra blanket, making sure he had water on the nightstand, the brush of my hand against his shoulder when I reached past him. And then the silence became harder than the talking. The apartment grew quiet in that particular way that only happens very late at night, when the world outside has mostly gone to sleep. I could hear him breathing, could feel the weight of everything unspoken settling between us like fog. "Come on," I said quietly, standing up. "Let me get the floor ready for you." We moved through the apartment together, gathering blankets and pillows from the linen closet. His gratitude felt heavy with every movement, apologizing for existing, for needing this, for taking up space in my night. I wanted to tell him to stop, that this was what you did for someone you cared about, but the words caught somewhere in my throat. We arranged the makeshift bed together on the floor beside my bed. Our hands brushed occasionally as we spread out the blankets, smoothed the pillows into place. Each touch felt electric in a way I wasn't prepared for. He lay down on the floor, still fully clothed, curled on his side, facing away from me. I retreated to my bed above him, pulling the covers up like they might protect me from what I was feeling. The darkness changed everything. Proximity without sight became its own language. I could hear the shift of fabric when he adjusted his position, the weight of his stillness. The silence between us grew thick, charged with everything we weren't saying. "Are you comfortable?" I asked into the darkness, knowing the answer before he gave it. "Yeah," he said, too quickly, too quiet. "I'm fine, thank you, really." We both knew he wasn't comfortable, but comfort wasn't what either of us needed right now. What we needed was this, the knowledge that we were close enough to reach each other if everything fell apart, but far enough apart that we could pretend we weren't thinking about it. Minutes stretched into something that felt like hours. I lay there listening to him not sleep, aware that he was listening to me not sleep. The ache of wanting to bridge the distance without crossing a line I wasn't sure existed anymore was almost physical. My hand hovered over the edge of the bed, then retreated. The space between us felt both impossibly small and infinitely vast. And then the rain started. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows with a steady rhythm that filled the silence between us. The sound was almost a relief, something to focus on besides the fact that my best friend was lying on my floor and I was lying in my bed, and neither of us was sleeping, and both of us knew exactly why. "Hey," he said after a long time, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Thank you for this, for letting me come here, for..." He trailed off, unable to finish. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You never have to thank me." The rain kept falling. I lay there watching the shadows the raindrops made on the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of the water against the glass, and tried very hard not to think about what it meant that I didn't want him to leave. I told myself to sleep. I told myself a lot of things that night. I woke to movement. Not the gentle shift of someone turning over in sleep, but something deliberate. The kind of movement that comes from being awake, from making a decision. He was standing in the darkness beside my bed. I wasn't fully awake, that strange half-consciousness where you're not sure if you're dreaming, but his presence registered immediately. My body tensed, alert in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. He didn't answer right away. I could barely see him in the darkness, just the outline of his shape, the weight of him standing there. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I almost missed it. "Can I..." The question hung unfinished between us, but I understood. I understood completely. I made space without speaking. The mattress dipped as he settled beside me, still clothed, still careful. His weight against the bed felt like it was happening in slow motion, like the world had shifted into a different frame rate. My breath caught in my chest and I held it, afraid that moving, that even breathing normally, might break whatever was happening. Neither of us moved for what felt like forever. The rain had stopped sometime while we slept, leaving only the ambient hum of the city and the sound of our breathing. Gradually, the tension softened. It didn't disappear. It transformed into something gentler, something that felt less like a question and more like an answer. He turned toward me. His back found my chest. My arm found its place around him, settling across his ribs like it had always belonged there. The warmth of another person, the realness of it, was almost overwhelming. He was solid and present and real in a way that made everything else feel distant. His breathing synchronized with mine. The rhythm became a conversation without words. I could feel his heartbeat, could feel the small movements of him settling deeper into the space between us. One of his hands found mine under the blanket, fingers interlacing with deliberate slowness. The sensation of his skin against mine sent something electric through my entire body. I whispered something I couldn't quite take back, something I'd been holding in since the moment he called. "It's okay. I've got you." He relaxed into that promise. I felt it happen, the last of the tension leaving his shoulders, the way his body softened against mine. His thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand. Neither of us was sleeping, but we existed in the space between wakefulness and dreams, in that suspended moment where nothing else mattered except this, his hand in mine, his back against my chest, the knowledge that we were choosing this. The rest of the night unfolded in small shifts, his fingers finding the inside of my wrist, my lips against the back of his neck, not quite a kiss, just a touch. The particular tenderness of being close to someone without needing anything more than closeness. Not quite sleep, not quite awake, existing in the space between, where everything felt possible and nothing felt rushed. Morning came slowly, and with it, the weight of what we'd done. Sunlight filtered through the curtains in soft gold streaks. His arm was still around me, his body still pressed against mine, and for a moment, just a moment, I let myself exist in that space without thinking about what it meant. Then awareness crept in. The weight of his arm, the warmth of his skin, the fact that this had happened, that we had let it happen, and now we had to face it in daylight. He was already awake. I could tell by the particular stillness of his body, the way he wasn't quite breathing naturally. He was lying there pretending to sleep, and I was lying there pretending to believe him. The pretense felt fragile, like if either of us moved too suddenly, the whole thing might shatter. I extracted myself slowly, carefully, the way you might move away from someone you were afraid of waking. The bed shifted under my weight. Cool air rushed in to fill the space where his warmth had been. He didn't open his eyes, but his jaw tightened slightly. He knew I was leaving. He just wasn't ready to acknowledge it yet. The kitchen felt safer than the bedroom. Distance, purpose, the ritualistic comfort of making coffee. I moved through the motions, filling the kettle, finding mugs, the small sounds of domesticity that felt grounding. He emerged after a few minutes, wearing the t-shirt he'd slept in, his hair disheveled, his eyes still cautious. "Morning," he said, and the word felt loaded with everything we weren't saying. "Hey, sleep okay?" The question was automatic, safe, the kind of thing you ask someone who isn't your best friend, who you just spent the night holding in ways that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with something neither of us had names for. "Yeah, better than I expected." He accepted the mug I handed him, his fingers brushing mine. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. "You?" "Good. Really good, actually." We stood there in the kitchen, two people who'd known each other for years, suddenly aware of every inch of space between us. He mentioned his ex once, something about needing to check his phone, see if there were messages. Then he stopped himself mid-sentence, like he'd caught himself doing something he didn't want to do anymore. I noticed the shift immediately. The way his attention had been on his phone, on the breakup, on the wreckage of his old relationship. Now it was here, with me, in this kitchen, in the aftermath of what we'd done. The guilt arrived quietly, settling into my stomach like something cold. Were we taking advantage of his vulnerability? Had I let him into my bed because he needed comfort, or because I wanted him there? The distinction felt important and impossible to untangle. He caught my expression, read something in my face that made him set his mug down. "What are you thinking?" he asked. His voice was careful, like he was afraid of my answer. Honesty spilled out before I could stop it. "I don't want you to regret this. Any of this. Not the call, Not coming here, not... I gestured vaguely toward the bedroom, toward the space where we'd held each other in the dark. Not any of it. He stepped closer. His hand found mine on the counter, fingers interlacing with the same deliberate slowness as they had in the darkness. "I won't regret it," he said. I couldn't. But there was uncertainty underneath his words, the awareness that daylight changed things, that vulnerability could shift into something more complicated once the sun came up. His phone buzzed on the counter, reality waiting, messages from people who didn't know what had happened here, who wouldn't understand even if we tried to explain. We didn't have an answer yet. Not one we could speak aloud anyway. Not one that felt safe in the morning light. We moved to the couch without discussing it, drawn by the need for distance and safety. The cushions between us felt intentional, a physical acknowledgement that we needed space to think. The rumpled blankets were still piled on the floor from last night, a physical reminder of how close we'd been. 2 mugs of cooling coffee sat on the table, the steam barely visible in the morning air. The particular intimacy of 2 people sitting in silence, after crossing a line neither of them had planned to cross, filled the room. He spoke first, which somehow made it harder. "I need to tell you something," he said, and I braced for rejection. But it came differently than I expected. "I'm afraid I used you." The words came out carefully, like he'd been rehearsing them. "I was broken, and you were here, and you were kind, and I needed someone to hold me. I know that. But I'm scared that's all this was, that I came here desperate and you..." He paused, searching for the right words. "That you gave me what I needed, and I mistook it for something else." I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. "Do you think that's what happened?" "I don't know." He looked at his hands. "That's what terrifies me." "Listen to me," I said, and waited until he met my eyes. "We both know the difference between needing someone and wanting them, between comfort and connection. What happened last night?" I gestured toward the bedroom, toward the space where we'd held each other. "That wasn't just me taking care of you. That was both of us choosing something." "But how do you know?" His voice cracked slightly. "How do you know it wasn't just the moment, the vulnerability, the late hour, the fact that I was falling apart?" The vulnerability of admitting it came out slowly. "Because I've wanted you for a long time. Not like this, maybe, not in this way, but I've wanted you. And last night, when you asked if you could come to bed, it wasn't about helping you anymore. It was about wanting to be close to you." He was quiet for a long time. "I think I want you too," he finally said. "Not just because I'm broken, but I can't be sure right now, and that's not fair to you." "I'm not asking you to be sure," I said. "I'm asking you to be honest, with yourself and with me." He considered this, turning it over in his mind the way he always did with difficult things. "I don't know if this is rebound or real," he said finally, "but I want to find out, if you do." We talked for hours after that, the conversation moving between vulnerability and practicality. We set gentle boundaries together, no rushing, no pretending this was simple or uncomplicated. His heart was still tender from the breakup, still raw in places neither of us could quite see yet. We agreed that touch was okay, that closeness was okay, but that clarity mattered more than escalation. The relief of being able to name what we both felt without demanding certainty was enormous. We didn't have to have all the answers right now. We just had to be honest about what we did know and what we didn't. He reached for my hand, and this time it was deliberate, not desperate. The difference was immediate and profound. This wasn't about needing comfort. This was about choosing connection. His fingers interlaced with mine, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not the panic of the night before, but something steadier. Something that felt like possibility. "I'm going to mess this up," he said quietly. "I'm going to have hard days where I'm not sure about anything." "I know," I said, "and I'll be here anyway." He squeezed my hand. Outside, the city was moving through its morning, people heading to work, living their ordinary lives, unaware that in this apartment, two people were quietly deciding to risk everything for something they couldn't quite name yet. He stayed for 3 more nights, not because we planned it that way, but because neither of us was ready for him to leave, and the pretense of him going home felt dishonest in a way we'd both agreed we couldn't afford anymore. The first night after our conversation was still cautious. We lay in bed together, but there was a formality to it, a deliberateness that came from knowing exactly what we were doing and why. His back against my chest, my arm around him, but with space for doubt, for second thoughts, for the possibility that morning might bring clarity that contradicted everything the night promised. We barely moved, barely breathed. Both of us hyper-aware of every point of contact, every place where our bodies touched. By the second night, something had shifted. The caution had softened into confidence. He turned toward me instead of away. His hand found my face in the darkness, fingers tracing the line of my jaw like he was learning me, committing me to memory. When he kissed me, it was slow and deliberate, not the desperate clinging of the first night, but something intentional. His lips tasted like tea and toothpaste and the particular tenderness of new intimacy. I felt myself opening to him in ways I hadn't anticipated, felt the walls I'd carefully maintained start to dissolve. His hand moved to my hair. Mine found his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat underneath my palm. We didn't rush. The night stretched out before us like we had all the time in the world, and maybe we did. Maybe time worked differently when you were learning someone's body, someone's particular way of breathing, the specific places that made them sigh. The third night brought kissing that was deeper, more confident. His hands moved with more certainty. Mine did too. We stayed clothed, honoring the boundaries we'd set, but the boundary between comfort and desire had become almost invisible. When he pulled back to breathe, his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel him smiling in the darkness. Between the nights came conversations that happened in the spaces where we existed together. The kitchen while making breakfast, the couch while watching something neither of us was really paying attention to, the bed in the early morning light before either of us had to be anywhere. He talked less about his ex. The breakup still existed. It was still real, still something he had to process, but it wasn't the center of his gravity anymore. Instead, he talked about noticing things about me, small observations that made me realize how carefully he'd been watching, how much attention he'd been paying. "You hum when you're making breakfast," he said one morning, sitting at the kitchen counter with his coffee. "Did you know that? This little tune. I don't think I ever noticed it before." "I've probably been doing it for years," I said, surprised that he'd seen something I hadn't even known about myself. "The way you listen too," he continued, "like people matter, like what they're saying actually matters to you. I don't think I appreciated that until now." I told him things I'd never said aloud before, fears I'd been carrying, dreams I'd written off as impossible, the particular loneliness of being someone's support system without ever being allowed to need support in return. He listened the way he'd always listened, but now there was something different in it, the knowledge that I was trusting him with pieces of myself I'd kept hidden. The apartment became a bubble where the outside world didn't quite reach. His job, my job, the friends who were starting to ask questions about where he was, all of it felt distant and manageable from inside this space we'd created together. We existed in a kind of suspended animation, knowing it couldn't last forever, but not quite ready to acknowledge that yet. One evening, he mentioned going home eventually. The words hung in the air between us, necessary but unwelcome. We both knew it was coming. He couldn't hide in my apartment forever. At some point, he'd have to face his old apartment, his old life, the wreckage of his old relationship. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, we had each other. Tonight was enough. The morning he was leaving, neither of us wanted to rush through it. His bag sat packed by the door, a physical acknowledgement of something we'd both been avoiding. He'd showered and dressed, put himself back together into the version of himself that existed outside this apartment. But there was something different about him now, something softer, something that couldn't be undone, no matter how many miles he put between us. We ended up on the kitchen counter, feet swinging like kids, the way people do when they need to be close but can't quite sit still. The domesticity of it felt almost cruel, this small, ordinary moment that was anything but ordinary. "What was this?" he asked, breaking the silence we'd been holding on to. "What do we call it?" The question we'd both been avoiding since that first night when he crawled into my bed. I'd known it was coming, we both had, but knowing and being ready were different things entirely. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't think we have to know right now." "But we should, shouldn't we?" There was an edge of anxiety in his voice. "We should probably define it, make sure we're on the same page." I considered this, turning it over in my mind the way I'd learned he liked me to do, carefully, thoughtfully, without rushing to easy answers. "Maybe," I said, "but maybe not everything needs a label immediately. Maybe some things are just real and complicated, and we figure out what to call them as we go." He was quiet for a moment, swinging his feet, processing. "I'm scared," he admitted, "of losing you, of repeating patterns, of wanting too much from someone who's already given me so much." The honesty of it landed hard. I reached over and took his hand, lacing our fingers together the way we'd learned to do in the darkness. "I'm scared too," I said, "of being a stepping stone, of your feelings changing once you're out of this apartment and back in the real world, of realizing that what we had here was just a moment, and moments don't last." "What if they do?" he asked quietly. "What if this isn't a moment?" "Then we figure it out together." But underneath the reassurance was something steadier, genuine care that existed independent of the fear. We weren't pretending this was simple. We weren't pretending we had all the answers. We were just two people who'd found something real in the wreckage of his breakup, and we were trying to figure out how to keep it alive. We decided that he'd go home, that he needed to process the breakup outside this apartment, needed to reclaim his own space and his own life. The agreement felt necessary and painful in equal measure. He needed to be whole on his own before we could build something together. We both understood that, even if understanding didn't make it easier. But we also decided we wouldn't disappear. We'd text. We'd see each other. We'd stay in touch in ways that mattered, that kept the connection alive even when we weren't in the same room. A long hug at the door, his arms around me like he was trying to memorize the feeling, like his body was trying to hold on to something his mind knew he had to let go of. I could feel him breathing, feel the weight of him against me, feel the particular ache of someone leaving who you want to stay. I kissed him once more, slowly, without urgency. Just a reminder, just a promise, just a way of saying that this wasn't an ending, even though it felt like one. Watching him leave was harder than I'd anticipated. The elevator doors closed, and he was gone. The apartment felt different after, emptier in a way that had nothing to do with physical space. His coffee mug sat on the counter. The blankets from the floor were still piled in the corner. The bed still smelled like him. 3 weeks passed. We texted, but it wasn't the same. The text came on a Thursday evening, simple and direct. "Can I see you?" 3 words that made my heart stutter against my ribs. 3 weeks of distance, of careful messages and emojis that couldn't quite bridge the space between us. And now this. The question hung in my phone's glow, heavy with possibility. I typed back, "Yes," before I could talk myself out of it, before I could list all the reasons why waiting longer might be safer. The nervousness that settled into my stomach as I waited for him to arrive was different this time. Not the panic of crisis management, but the trembling uncertainty of someone standing at the edge of something they desperately want. When I opened the door, he looked lighter. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. His shoulders sat naturally instead of curled inward, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested he'd put down a heavy burden. His eyes were clear, present, meeting mine without the fog of grief that had clouded them before. He stood there in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, smiling in a way that reached his eyes. "Hey," he said, and the words sounded like him again, like the version of him I'd known before the breakup had shattered everything, but somehow softer, more grounded. We moved into the apartment without the urgency of crisis, without the weight of his breakdown hanging in the air. He told me about the therapy sessions, about sitting in a professional's office and untangling the knots of his old relationship, his old patterns, his old ways of losing himself in other people. He spoke carefully, measuring his words, but there was a certainty underneath them that hadn't been there before. "I couldn't stop thinking about that night," he admitted, sitting on the couch with his knee bouncing slightly, the old nervous habit I'd always found endearing. "About you. About how you held me without asking for anything in return. But I needed to know if I wanted you because you were safe or because you're you." I sat across from him, close enough to touch but holding back, respecting the space he needed to finish. "And what did you figure out?" "That it's both," he said, "but mostly the second one. I want you from a place of wholeness, not desperation. I needed to be able to say that and mean it." I'd had 3 weeks too. 3 weeks of questioning whether I'd been a lifeline or a choice, whether the feelings he'd expressed in the vulnerability of that first night would survive the daylight of his recovery. 3 weeks of being honest with myself about the fact that I'd fallen in love with him somewhere between the floor setup and the morning after, and that this love wasn't about fixing him or saving him or being needed. "I love you," I said, the words coming out quiet but steady. "Not because you needed me, because you're you." His breath caught, his eyes filled with tears that didn't fall, balanced on the edge of emotion, and then he was smiling. A real smile, the kind that breaks through storm clouds. He reached for me, and I went to him, and his kiss felt like a beginning rather than a rescue. His lips were warm and certain against mine, his hands cradling my face with an intention that spoke of choice rather than clutching. That night when he stayed, it was different. We both knew it. The bed felt vast and perfect as we settled into it together, both of us choosing to be there, neither of us seeking shelter from any storm except the ordinary weather of being human. I touched him with intention, my hands learning the landscape of him with the patience of someone who knows they have time. We kissed slowly, deeply, rediscovering the taste and texture of each other with familiarity and discovery mixed together. His hands found the familiar places they'd mapped in those first tentative nights, but now they moved with knowledge rather than exploration. Fingers traced skin like reading a story we'd already started, knowing the plot but savouring the words. In the dark, his whispers were sultry against my ear. "I've missed this," he breathed, and I felt the vibration of his voice against my neck. I've missed you." The physical connection between us deepened, our bodies pressing close, hands wandering beneath fabric, but we held back from crossing into sex. There was a sanctity in the restraint, a tenderness in choosing to wait, to let this be about emotional intimacy rather than physical escalation. We existed in the charged space between desire and patience, letting our breathing synchronize, letting our hands speak what words couldn't quite capture in the dark. We fell asleep tangled together, limbs intertwined, both of us exactly where we wanted to be. No questions hung in the air, no uncertainty shadowed the darkness, just the steady rhythm of two hearts beating in time. Morning came with sunlight rather than confusion, clarity instead of doubt. Months have passed since that night he called at 11:47 p.m, and the apartment has become something different than it was. He's moved into the unit next door, not living together yet, but close enough that it feels intentional. Close enough that he can be at my door in 30 seconds if either of us needs it. Close enough that we've stopped pretending this is temporary. Looking back at that first night, the desperation feels almost foreign now. I can still access the memory of it. The fracture in his voice, the way his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to disappear. But it's softer now, contextualized by everything that came after. Vulnerability was the bridge, I understand now, not the destination. The destination was this: two people learning to build something real from the wreckage of his old relationship and my own carefully maintained walls. He still has hard days. The breakup still surfaces sometimes, still catches him off guard in moments when he's not braced for it. There are mornings when he wakes up and the grief is fresh again, when he questions whether he made the right choices or whether he's just trading one kind of pain for another. But now, he does that processing with me beside him, not instead of me. The difference is enormous. I'm not his savior anymore. I'm his partner. Someone who witnesses his struggle without needing to fix it. The realization that healing and love aren't mutually exclusive came gradually, so slowly that I didn't notice it happening until it was already true. He could grieve his old relationship and be present in this one. He could acknowledge his mistakes and still move forward. He could be broken and whole at the same time. We all could. That was the secret nobody told us, that you don't have to be perfectly healed to love someone. You just have to be honest about where you are. Last week, he asked about moving in together. We were sitting on the couch in his apartment, his head on my shoulder, my hand in his hair, existing in that comfortable silence that comes from knowing someone so thoroughly that words feel optional. "What do you think?" he asked. "About making this official?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. There was no hesitation, no moment of doubt, just the certainty that comes from knowing you want to wake up next to someone every morning, that you want to build the ordinary moments alongside the extraordinary ones. Small moments matter more than big declarations, I've learned. His hand in mine on the couch, comfortable silence while we read or watch something. The knowledge that he chose to stay, that he keeps choosing to stay, that every morning he wakes up and decides we're worth the effort. That's what love is, I think. Not the dramatic rescue or the desperate vulnerability of that first night, but the quiet decision to keep showing up, to keep being honest, to keep choosing each other even when the crisis has passed and the real work begins. Sometimes I think about how I almost didn't answer that call, how I could have let it go to voicemail, told him to call a crisis hotline or a different friend, how I could have protected myself by maintaining distance. But I didn't. And because I didn't, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. He saved me too, I realize now, not in the dramatic way, but in the ways that matter. He cracked me open. He made me vulnerable. He showed me that being needed wasn't the same as being loved, and that being loved meant being chosen even when I wasn't necessary. He taught me that second chances aren't about erasing what came before. They're about two people deciding the risk is worth taking. The apartment, our space now, has become a sanctuary for both of us. Not because of one perfect night, but because of all the nights that followed. The ones where we both kept showing up. The ones where we stayed honest, even when honesty was hard. The ones where we chose each other again and again, until choosing became breathing. If you're afraid of vulnerability, or afraid of letting someone in, take it slow. But don't let fear stop you from the people who might change your life. Thank you for staying in this story with me. Subscribe if you want more moments of real connection and honest heartbreak. We'll be here, in the quiet, waiting for you.